They were small, fast, and deadly in the dark. At 78 feet long and weighing just 56 tons, our PT boats were David facing Goliath in the vast Pacific theater. But on this moonless night in November 1942, as we cut through the black waters off Guadalcanal, we were about to prove that sometimes the smallest weapons can deliver the biggest surprise. My name is Lieutenant Jack Morrison, and I commanded PT 164 during some of the most desperate fighting in the Solomon Islands. What I'm about to tell you happened during the height of the Guadalcanal campaign, when the Japanese were throwing everything they had at us to retake Henderson Field. They called it the Tokyo Express, those nightly runs where enemy destroyers and cruisers would race down the slot, unload troops and supplies, then disappear before dawn. We called it the Rat Run, and it was our job to make sure some of those rats never made it home. The date was November 16, 1942. Just 2 days earlier, we'd witnessed one of the most brutal naval battles of the entire war. American and Japanese battleships had slugged it out in Iron Bottom Sound until the water ran red with blood and oil. The USS South Dakota had taken 42 hits, and we'd lost the destroyer USS Walk with most of her crew. But we'd given as good as we got, maybe better. The Japanese battleship Kirishimale at the bottom of the Sound, along with the destroyer Ayanami and thousands of enemy sailors. Now, as the smoke cleared from that massive confrontation, intelligence reports were flooding in. The Japanese weren't giving up. A large convoy of troop transports was heading our way, escorted by destroyers and cruisers. They were bringing reinforcements for one final push to retake Guadalcanal. If they succeeded in landing those troops, everything we'd fought for in the past 3 months would be lost. That's where we came in, a motor torpedo boat Squadron 3, better known as RON 3. We had 4 boats that night: my PT-164, Lieutenant Al Cluster's PT-157, Ensign Barney Ross's PT-109, and Lieutenant Bob Searle's PT-48. 48 torpedoes between us, and a mission that seemed impossible even by PT boat standards. The briefing had been short and grim. Commander Alan Montgomery, our squadron leader, had stood before us in the sweltering heat of our makeshift base on Tulagi Island. Maps covered every surface, marked with red arrows showing the enemy's approach. "Gentlemen," Montgomery began, his weathered face serious in the lamplight, "we've got a Tokyo Express coming down the slot tonight. But this isn't just destroyers and cruisers, they're bringing the whole army. 11 troop transports, each loaded with 1,000 soldiers. That's 11,000 fresh Japanese troops heading for Guadalcanal." The room fell silent. We all knew what that meant. Our Marines on Henderson Field were already outnumbered and running low on everything: ammunition, food, hope. 11,000 more enemy soldiers would tip the balance decisively. "The good news," Montgomery continued, "is that they're coming at night, and they're coming through our backyard. The bad news is they've got an escort that'll make your hair curl. 2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, and God knows what else. Intelligence says they'll be making their approach around midnight, hugging the north coast off Savo Island." He pointed to a spot on the map where the dark waters funneled between Savo Island and the main Solomon chain. "That's where we'll hit them. 4 boats, coordinated attack. We go in fast, we hit hard, and we get out before they know what happened." Lieutenant Cluster raised his hand. "What about air cover, sir?" Montgomery shook his head. "The Army Air Force is grounded tonight. Too many planes shot up in yesterday's raid. The Navy's got their hands full with damage control after the battleship action. It's just us, gentlemen, the smallest boats in the Pacific Fleet, going up against the biggest targets we've ever faced." As we prepared our boats for the mission, I couldn't help but think about the irony of it all. PT boats had been designed for coastal defense, not open ocean warfare. With their wooden hulls and gasoline engines, they were fast but fragile. A single hit from a destroyer's 5-inch gun could blow us to pieces. But they were also nearly invisible on radar, almost silent when running on muffled engines, and deadly accurate with their Mark 8 torpedoes. PT-164 was my baby, and I knew every rivet and wire aboard her. She was powered by 3 12-cylinder Packard engines that could push her to 41 knots in calm water. We carried 4 21-inch torpedo tubes, twin 50-caliber machine guns, and a 20-millimeter cannon. More importantly, we carried 12 of the best sailors in the Pacific Fleet. My crew had been together since training in Rhode Island. There was Chief Petty Officer Mike Sullivan, my second in command, and the best torpedoman in the squadron. Tommy Chen, our radioman, who could coax a signal out of a dead radio set. Seaman First Class Johnny Martinez, our gunner, who could put a .50 caliber round through a dime at 200 yards. And 9 other men who'd proven themselves in a dozen night actions against the Tokyo Express. "All stations report ready, Skipper," Sullivan called out as we prepared to cast off from Tulagi. The other 3 boats were lined up alongside us, their crews making final preparations. In the dim light, I could see the tension on every face. We all knew the odds. PT boats had sunk plenty of destroyers and cruisers in the past few months, but we'd never gone up against targets this big or this well defended. "Cast off all lines," I ordered. "Let's go hunting." We slipped away from the pier at 2,200 hours, running silent with muffled engines. The night was perfect for our kind of work: overcast sky, no moon, and a slight chop that would help mask our wake. We formed up in a loose diamond formation, with PT-164 leading, PT-157 and PT-109 on the flanks, and PT-48 bringing up the rear. The run to Savo Island took 90 minutes at cruising speed. We maintained radio silence, communicating only through hand signals and prearranged light patterns. Every man aboard knew his job, and we'd rehearsed this type of attack until we could do it in our sleep. At 2,330 hours, we reached our patrol area off the northwest coast of Savo Island. The water was dead calm, black as ink except for the phosphorescent wake behind each boat. I ordered the formation to spread out and cut engines to idle. Now we waited. "Contact," Tommy Chen whispered urgently from the radio shack. "Multiple radar contacts bearing 320, range 12 miles and closing." I felt my pulse quicken. This was it, the moment we'd been training for, fighting for, living for over the past 3 months. Somewhere out there in the darkness, 11 enemy troop transports were approaching, loaded with soldiers whose only mission was to kill American Marines. "All boats, this is PT-164, I whispered into the radio. "Target bearing 320, range 12 miles. Execute Plan Charlie on my signal." Plan Charlie was our standard attack formation for large convoys. We'd approach from 4 different directions, launch our torpedoes simultaneously, then scatter before the escorts could react. In theory, it was perfect. In practice, it required split-second timing and a lot of luck. "Contacts are spreading out," Chen reported. "Count 11 large targets in column formation, plus at least 6 smaller contacts, probably escorts." I raised my binoculars and peered into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but black water and blacker sky. Then, gradually, shapes began to emerge. Dark silhouettes against the horizon, moving steadily toward Guadalcanal. The Japanese convoy was bigger than intelligence had reported, and they were making better time than expected. "Range 8 miles in closing," Chen whispered. "They're making 15 knots. I did the math in my head. At this speed, they'd be in our attack zone in less than 20 minutes. It was time to move. "All boats, this is PT-164. Commence attack approach. Maintain radio silence until torpedo launch." We brought our engines up to quarter speed, just enough to maintain steerage way while staying as quiet as possible. The plan called for us to approach from the north, while the other 3 boats swung around to attack from the south and east. If everything went according to plan, we'd catch the convoy in a crossfire that would give them nowhere to run. The next 15 minutes felt like hours. Every sound seemed amplified: the low rumble of our engines, the splash of water against our bow, the whispered reports from Chen as he tracked the enemy formation. My hands were sweating inside my gloves, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly and steadily. "Range 4 miles, Chen reported. "They're holding course and speed." I could see them clearly now through my binoculars. 11 large ships in a column, surrounded by smaller escorts. The lead transport was enormous, probably 8,000 tons, big enough to carry a full regiment. Behind her came 10 more, each loaded with soldiers' equipment and supplies for the Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal. "Range 3 miles. Target bearing 340. This was it. Any closer and we'd be spotted by the escorts. I keyed the radio once, twice, 3 times the signal to commence final attack approach. PT-164 leaped forward as I pushed the throttles to full power. Behind me, I could hear the other boats doing the same, their engines roaring to life as they raced toward their attack positions. The element of surprise was gone now. Stealth was less important than speed. Torpedo tubes ready, Sullivan called out from the forward deck. Range 1,500 yards and closing fast. I could see the lead transport clearly now, a massive black shape against the horizon. Her deck lights were on, probably to help with navigation through the tricky waters around Savo Island. She had no idea that death was racing toward her at 40 knots. Range 1,000 yards. Stand by tubes 1 and 2. The transport was growing larger by the second. I could see figures moving on her deck, probably Japanese soldiers getting ready for the landing. In a few minutes, they'd be swimming for their lives if they were lucky. Range 800 yards. Fire 1. Sullivan's torpedo leaped from the tube with a sharp hiss of compressed air. The 21-inch weapon hit the water cleanly and disappeared beneath the surface, its wake barely visible in the darkness. Fire 2. The second torpedo followed immediately, both weapons racing toward the transport at 46 knots. At this range, it would take less than a minute for them to reach their target. Hard left rudder, I ordered. All ahead flank. PT-164 swung hard to port, her engines screaming as we began our escape run. Behind us, the other boats were launching their own attacks, their torpedoes streaking toward the helpless transports. 40 seconds to impact, Sullivan called out, his stopwatch in hand. I kept my binoculars trained on the lead transport, watching for the telltale flash of the explosion. Around us, the sea was suddenly alive with activity. Searchlights were stabbing through the darkness, and the sharp crack of 5-inch guns echoed across the water as the Japanese escorts began firing blindly into the night. 30 seconds. A destroyer off our port bow had spotted us and was turning to intercept. Her searchlight swept across our bow, and I could see the muzzle flashes of her deck guns as she opened fire. Shells screamed overhead, so close I could feel the heat. 20 seconds. Incoming rounds, Martinez yelled from the gun mount. Destroyer bearing 270. More shells splashed into the water around us, sending up towering geysers of spray. One round hit so close that shrapnel rattled against our hull. 10 seconds. The destroyer was closing fast, her guns firing continuously now. We were in a race for our lives, trying to get out of range before she could land a killing blow. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Impact. The explosion was tremendous, a brilliant flash of orange and red that lit up the entire horizon. Our first torpedo had struck the lead transport amidships, and she was already listing heavily to port. The second torpedo hit 20 seconds later, and the massive ship simply broke in half, her bow and stern sections sinking within minutes. Direct hit, Sullivan shouted. She's going down, but there was no time to celebrate. All around us, the night was exploding with gunfire and searchlights. The other PT boats were having their own battles, dodging shells and launching torpedoes at the remaining transports. PT-157 had scored a hit on the second ship in line, and she was burning fiercely from stem to stern. Destroyer closing on our starboard quarter, Chen called out. I looked back to see a Japanese destroyer racing toward us, her guns blazing. She was less than 1,000 yards away and closing fast. At this range, she couldn't miss. Smoke screen, I ordered. Martinez triggered our smoke generator, and a thick cloud of white smoke began pouring from our stern. It would hide us for a few minutes, but it wouldn't stop the destroyer from following our wake. PA-109 is under heavy fire, Chen reported, his voice tight with worry. She's taking hits. Through the smoke and chaos, I could see Ensign Ross's boat racing for the safety of the Solomon Islands. She was trailing smoke and sparks, obviously damaged but still fighting. Her rear gunner was returning fire with his twin 50s, the tracers arcing through the darkness like deadly fireworks. We need to draw that destroyer away from 109, I decided. Hard right rudder. Take us straight at him. Sullivan looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Skipper, that's a destroyer. She'll blow us out of the water. Not if we get in close, I replied. She can't depress her guns enough to hit us at point-blank range. It was a desperate gamble, but it was our only chance to save PT-109. We swung hard to starboard, heading straight for the destroyer's bow. She was so close now that I could see the muzzle flashes from her individual guns. All guns, target the destroyer's bridge, I ordered. Martinez opened up with everything we had, the 20mm cannon, both 50 caliber machine guns, and even our small arms. The tracer streamed across the water, sparking off the destroyer's hull and superstructure. We weren't doing much damage, but we were certainly getting their attention. The destroyer's captain took the bait. He swung his ship toward us, trying to bring his main guns to bear. But we were too close and too fast. We raced down his port side at full throttle, less than 200 yards away, our guns blazing. "Look at that!" Sullivan shouted, pointing at the destroyer's deck. Our 20mm cannon had found its mark. The destroyer's forward gun mount was out of action, its crew scattered by our accurate fire. But she still had plenty of fight left in her. "She's turning to ram us," Chen warned. The destroyer was indeed turning hard to port, trying to cut us off before we could escape. If she succeeded, her massive steel bow would crush our wooden hull like an eggshell. "Emergency full ahead," I ordered, pushing our engines beyond their redline limits. The Packard engines responded magnificently, their 12 cylinders screaming as they delivered every ounce of power they had. PT-164 literally flew across the water, her bow lifting clear of the surface as we raced for our lives. The destroyer's bow missed us by less than 50 yards, her wake tossing us around like a cork in a bathtub. But we were clear, racing toward the safety of the Solomon Islands while the Japanese ship fell behind. "Damage report," I called out. "Few holes in the hull, nothing serious," Sullivan reported. "Engines are running hot but still operational." "We're good to go, Skipper." I looked back at the convoy, or what was left of it. In the space of 20 minutes, we'd sunk or damaged at least 6 of the 11 transports. The sea was littered with burning ships, lifeboats, and debris. Thousands of Japanese soldiers were swimming in the oil-slicked water, their plans for reinforcing Guadalcanal literally sinking beneath them. PT-157. This is PT-164. "What's your status?" "We're okay, Jack," Lieutenant Cluster's voice crackled over the radio. "Took a few hits, but nothing fatal. We got 2 clean hits on separate targets. Both ships are going down." "PT-48 report." "All okay here," Lieutenant Searles replied. "We put 3 torpedoes into the largest transport. She's already gone. The others are burning." "PT-109, come in." There was a long pause, then Ensign Ross's voice came through the static, weak but determined. "PT-109 here. We're shot up pretty bad, but we're still afloat. Got 1 torpedo hit on a transport before they nailed us. She's burning but still moving. Can you make it back to base?" "Affirmative. We're taking on water, but the pumps are holding. We'll make it." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. All 4 boats were still afloat, and we'd accomplished our mission beyond all expectations. The Japanese convoy was effectively destroyed, their reinforcements for Guadalcanal either dead or swimming in Iron Bottom Sound. As we headed back toward Tulagi, I couldn't help but think about what we'd just accomplished. 4 small PT boats, weighing less than 200 tons combined, had just destroyed a convoy that represented months of Japanese planning and thousands of tons of shipping. We'd proven that in the right hands, even the smallest weapons could have a decisive impact on the course of a war. The trip back to base was uneventful. The Japanese escorts were too busy rescuing survivors to chase us, and we encountered no further enemy contact. We reached Tulagi just as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reflected off the calm waters of the harbor. Commander Montgomery was waiting for us at the pier, along with what seemed like half the base. Word of our attack had already reached headquarters, and the radio was crackling with reports of the convoy's destruction. "Gentlemen," Montgomery said as we secured our boats, "I've just received word from Admiral Halsey himself. The Japanese convoy has been completely destroyed. 11 transports sunk or damaged beyond repair, along with 2 destroyers and a cruiser. Intelligence estimates that over 8,000 enemy soldiers were killed or captured. The numbers were staggering. In a single night action, we'd eliminated an entire Japanese division and prevented what could have been the decisive battle for Guadalcanal. The cost to us had been minimal: some bullet holes, a few wounded sailors, and PT-109 would need extensive repairs. But we'd all made it home. Later that morning, as I sat in the squadron's operations tent writing my after-action report, I tried to put the night's events into perspective. We'd gone into battle knowing the odds were against us. 4 wooden boats against 11 steel transports and their escorts. On paper, it should have been suicide, but we'd had several advantages that no amount of armor or firepower could match. First, we'd had the element of surprise. The Japanese hadn't expected an attack by PT boats, and their convoy was configured for maximum speed rather than defense. Second, we'd had superior night fighting capabilities. Our crews had trained extensively in darkness, and our boats were equipped with the latest radar and radio equipment. Finally, we'd had something that can't be measured in tonnage or firepower: the determination to win. The Battle of Guadalcanal would continue for another 2 months, but the night of November 16, 1942, marked a turning point. The Japanese never again attempted to reinforce their garrison with large convoys. Instead, they were forced to rely on submarines and fast destroyers carrying supplies in small quantities. The Tokyo Express continued to run, but it was no longer the decisive factor it had been in the early months of the campaign. PT-164 would go on to fight in dozens more actions throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. We'd sink destroyers, cruisers, and supply ships. We'd rescue downed pilots, evacuate wounded Marines, and carry out reconnaissance missions deep behind enemy lines. But nothing would ever match the significance of that night off Savo Island, when we proved that America's smallest war machines could deliver the biggest surprises. Years later, when historians would analyze the Guadalcanal campaign, they would focus on the great battleship actions and the heroic defense of Henderson Field. But those of us who were there knew the truth. Sometimes the smallest actions have the greatest consequences. 4 PT boats and 48 men had changed the course of the Pacific War, proving that in the right hands, even David could bring down Goliath. The Japanese had learned a harsh lesson that night. In the dark waters of the Solomon Islands, they were never safe from attack. America's PT boats were out there, waiting in the shadows, ready to strike with devastating effect. We were small, we were fast, and we were deadly in the dark. And we would never give up, never surrender, never let the enemy pass unchallenged. The war in the Pacific would continue for another 3 years, but the night of November 16, 1942, marked the beginning of the end for Japanese ambitions in the South Pacific. They had sent their best troops, their finest ships, and their most experienced commanders to retake Guadalcanal. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to be intimidated no matter how long the odds or how dark the night. We had proven that night that American ingenuity, determination, and courage could overcome any obstacle. 4 PT boats had accomplished what an entire fleet might have struggled to achieve. We had shown the world that in the hands of free men fighting for their country, even the smallest weapons could become instruments of victory. As I finished my report and prepared to get some much-needed sleep, I couldn't help but smile. Somewhere in Tokyo, Japanese naval commanders were trying to explain to their superiors how an entire convoy had been destroyed by 4 small boats. They would blame poor intelligence, bad weather, or simple bad luck. But we knew the truth. They had underestimated the fighting spirit of American sailors and the deadly effectiveness of America's smallest war machines. The PT boats of Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 had written their names in history that night, proving that size doesn't always matter in naval warfare. What matters is the courage to close with the enemy, the skill to strike accurately, and the determination to see the mission through to its conclusion. We had all of those qualities in abundance, and we had used them to devastating effect. In the years that followed, PT boats would become legendary throughout the Pacific theater. They would sink over 300 enemy vessels, rescue thousands of Allied personnel, and carry out countless missions behind enemy lines. But for me, nothing would ever match the satisfaction of that night off Savo Island when we proved that America's smallest war machines could tear apart the mightiest enemy fleets. The Japanese had learned a lesson they would never forget. In the dark waters of the Pacific, death could come from the most unexpected sources. 4 PT boats had shown them that no convoy was too large, no escort too powerful, and no mission too dangerous for American sailors determined to win. We were small, we were fast, and we were deadly in the dark. And that was all we needed to change the course of history.